Okay,
I'm ready to go.
Yes.
Yes, we are all ready. Okay. A very warm good morning to everyone present here. This is the ongoing part of the series of lectures that is being organized by the Department of Political Science in collaboration with IQAC LCB College. Uh, Before we start off with our speaker, I would like to just give a backdrop of what exactly the topic is all about. Today's topic being sixth schedule, with where many of us being very new to the understanding of sixth schedule. Our speaker would definitely be highlighting a lot of aspects of the sixth schedule, but I would just like to give a very brief introduction towards the understanding of sixth schedule in Dima Hasao. Now, Karbi Anglong and Dima Hasao, erstwhile North Kachar Hills, and recently the BTAD is administered under the special provision of the Indian Constitution, which is enshrined in Schedule 6, hence the sixth schedule. It is a form of constitution within constitution. In simpler words, it is also known as a mini constitution. This provides for special administrative apparatus in the form of district council or autonomous council. The district council in Dima Hasao became Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now this provides for a special administrative apparatus in the form of district council or autonomous council. The district council in Dima Hasao became operational in 1952, which has been upgraded to autonomous council in the year 19. As per memorandum of understanding signed between the central government, the state government, the ASDC, that is the Autonomous Demand State Committee, the KSA, that is the Karbi Students Association, and the DSU, that is the Dimasa Students Union. Members of the Autonomous Council are elected on the basis of universal adult franchise or the popular voting, and the executive committee formed by the majority party is headed by the chief executive member, popularly known as the CEM or the chief executive member. Now, before going ahead, I would now like to request the coordinator for IQAC, Dr. Diba Borwa, to kindly speak a few words and inaugurate the session.
Thank you, Kunjalata. Hello, a very good morning to all our esteemed participants. On behalf of the principal and as the coordinator of the IQAC, I welcome everyone. First of all, I would like to welcome our esteemed resource person of this webinar, Ms. Rakhi Naiding. In the same breath, I also welcome all the faculty members from different colleges, research scholars and students for being a part of this very interesting webinar, because we will gain insights into aspects of autonomy and the implications of the sixth schedule in Assam. We all know that the sixth schedule gives the indigenous communities considerable autonomy with the aim of protecting their customs, to expedite economic development, and most importantly, to safeguard and ensure ethnic security. Now, the benefits of this schedule is apparent in the material transformations in Kokrajhar and Udalguri under the Bodoland Territorial Council. The success of the schedule in Dima Hasao will be addressed by Ms. Naiding, who I am sure will help us gain perceptions of the implications of the sixth schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Dibaba. Before we move ahead, I would like to give a brief introduction of our resource person for today. We have amidst us Ms. Rakhi Naiding, who is an MA, who is at present teaching in the Department of Political Science at Bikali College, Dhupdora in Gwalpara. She's done her MA in Political Science from Guwahati University and is a PhD research candidate at the University of Hyderabad. Her areas of interest include nationalism, autonomy, ethnicity, caste social movements. Few of her papers have been presented at the national and international seminar, which included more or less more of the above mentioned topics. She is an Ambedkarite and have also been working as a Bahujan activist since the year 2015 and is now dedicated to the autonomous politics of the subaltern. She was also the president of the Bahujan Students Front at the University of Hyderabad and has represented the organizations at various national level programs such as the Save Reservation, Save Nation, Save India, conducted by the Bahujan Vidyarthi Sangh at Bangalore. She was also a representative at the organization at the talk conducted by Ambedkar Wadi Mission, Maharashtra on Ambedkar Jayanti in 2016 alongside senior journalist Dilip C. Mandal. She was also a representative at the Naga Lok International Meet of the Bahujan activists in Nagpur in 2017. Under her presidency of BSF, Hyderabad Central University Students Union got its very first female tribal union member from the Northeast in 2017 and 18. She was also part of the Rohit Vemula movement against caste discrimination in higher educational spaces in 2016 and was a member of the Joint Action Committee formed to demand justice for Rohit Vemula and Rohit Act to curb discrimination faced by marginal communities on the basis of caste and ethnicity. A very, very warm welcome to you, Ms. Rakhi Naiding, and the platform is all yours. Thank you.
Am I audible? I'm audible, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm very grateful to the Department of Political Science, LCB College, the coordinator, Kunjalata ma'am of the Women's Cell of LCB College, Dr. Diba Borua of the IQAC, and the principal of the LCB College for having me here today. And thanks to all the participants for joining me. At the very onset, let me make that, put that across, because by the end, many people tend to leave. So I just thought, I'll thank the participants also at the very beginning for joining me. So the topic that I have taken up for my presentation today is autonomy and sixth schedule and experiences from Dima Hasao. I suppose I'm speaking for 45 minutes, and I hope that I'll be able to wrap it up within the given time. And then after that, we can have a few questions. Before starting off, let me, at the very beginning, give you all an outline of what I will be covering in my presentation today. So at the very beginning, I think I'd like to discuss what is autonomy and why we need autonomy and who needs autonomy. I just want to look at it from a few philosophical, just at the few philosophical and political connotations of autonomy, what it means and why we ask for it, why we demand it, and who needs autonomy. And secondly, I want to look at autonomy movements in the country, maybe a little bit at the global level also, and how it is distinct. We have to make that distinction from the mainstream, such as the nationalist. We have a nationalist discourse. We have now leftist discourse or the right discourse and all that. So how does our autonomy movements is different from the mainstream discourses? I want to speak on that a little bit. After that, I will be taking up the specific principle of sixth schedule. What sixth schedule represents, what it stands for in the mainstream discourse and in the constitution. And most importantly, I want to look at what it means to us, who are administered under its provisions and who live in proximity of the sixth schedule, right? And fourthly, of course, since I'm speaking on the experiences from Dima Hasao, so I'll be engaging with the specific engagements and the praxis of autonomy and the sixth schedule, or in Dima Hasao, or the erstwhile North Cachar Hills. I'll be looking at a few, shortcomings or the internal contradictions of it, and hopefully I'll be able to, point out some solutions, or a way forward, because I think, diagnosis of the problem is fine, but then after that, until and unless we come up with certain solutions, I feel like, there is no need of having a discussion on the problems alone. So let me begin on what is autonomy, and why we need autonomy, and like I said, who needs autonomy. Autonomy, as we all know, comes from the Greek root words. I think all of us have studied that. We know that it's from the words autos and nomos, right? Which means self and law, respectively. And simply put, it could mean laws made by the self and which in turn govern the self. And if you look at the concept, the history of it, this concept was developed in moral philosophy by a German Enlightenment thinker like Immanuel Kant. And of course, later many others, political thinkers have written extensively on it, such as J.S. Mill or Isaiah Berlin, Dworkin, and so on and so forth. Autonomy, but then in contemporary times, what it mainly symbolizes is it symbolizes emerging patterns of new political spaces and democratization. That's what autonomy symbolizes. And although Kant was mainly concerned with autonomy as a personal ideal, today autonomy and movements for autonomy would mean an assertion that one has the capacity to govern oneself and the actual condition of self-government, that is having decision-making power over institutions that control us, you see. And then autonomy is also resistance, right? It is resistance to the power of the state. And as such, demands for autonomy is encountered among various sections of the society. Autonomy is not, let us not bring down to only certain, autonomous movement, autonomy movements where we specifically point out that we are, demanding autonomous councils or whatever, right? We have autonomous movements, which we have several movements which are resisting the state who enshrine the idea of autonomy. So now, like I said, there are various sections of the society who have been demanding autonomy. Now, who are these various sections of society who are seeking autonomy, right? And why? So there are many sections seeking autonomy from oppressive structures. Globally, I would say, we have the feminist movement who have written actually, now they have been engaging extensively with autonomy. So now we have been engaging extensively with autonomy. In the feminist movement has been engaging extensively with autonomy, and they are demanding autonomy from patriarchal and patriarchy structures, right? Like, let's say recently, and for I can also give the example of like recent Black Lives Matter movement, who are demanding autonomy from structures that are run by white supremacists. At the national level, we have the Dalit Bahujan movement, which I am also a part of. Then we have the Adivasi movements, right? And we have several sovereignty movements here in the region and elsewhere. And at a local level, we have our own, smaller autonomy movements, right? So all these different sections, okay, are demanding autonomy. And all these sections have been seeking autonomy of and from overbearing structures, because they believe that every individual and a collective, right, a community, has the capacity to rule oneself. That is the essence of it, right? In this sense, I'd like to point out that autonomy is different from freedom. Okay, in autonomy, the capacity to self-rule is immanent instead of external, as in freedom. As individuals, and hence in extension as a community, we all have this. What autonomy claims is that we all have the capacity inherently built to make rules, to govern not just self, but to follow those same rules in our exchange with others. And without autonomy at the individual level and at the community level, like I say, no growth is possible. Spiritually, there is no growth. Politically and socially, there can be no growth. And self-actualization is not possible at all without this, without exercising this essence, of what we call autonomy. It takes away our very humanity from us, if we are not given autonomy. our reason, our rationalities, something that which makes us human, is that capacity itself is taken away from us. And that would render us, I would say, subhuman. Without autonomy and without the exercise of it, we would remain but slaves, you see, psychologically as well as physiologically. So I think, you know, this is what I understand what autonomy means and why is it necessary and for whom is it necessary. Now, secondly, as I said, like, you know, I want to discuss the autonomy movements, right? The autonomy movements, the particulars, okay? And make the distinction from the mainstream. So, you know, from the overarching nationalist discourse, or let's say the discourses of the left or the right, you know, which are universal, okay? So, and this distinction is important. Why this distinction is important? Because if you don't do that, then there is a possibility that autonomous movements will be co-opted, right, in the larger narratives like that of the nationalist discourse. And also there are several movements who question the state. You know, these are not just smaller autonomous movements which are questioning the state, asserting against the state, like I pointed out earlier, right? There are several movements which question the state, such as, let's say, the class struggle of the left. But then in class struggle, what happens is, you know, as we have seen, okay, identities such as that of caste or gender or race or religion, you know, have been, you know, more or less sidelined. Why? Because of their own fears that these identities are part of the superstructure and will be appropriated by the state, and that will hurt the communist unity. You know, that is what the class struggle says, right? And then presently you will see that, you know, today there is this overarching discourse of the Hindu right. And we have to make sure that, you know, our movements are not co-opted by this larger discourses. So that's why the distinction, you know, we have to make sure that there are distinctions. I'm sorry, this, you know, my phone keeps coming. So my students, sometimes they text me and call me, you know, they have their own concerns regarding classes and exams. So anyway, let me continue. So what we have to do is ensure these distinctions, you know, from the mainstream discourses. It is, we have to ensure, because this is also a responsibility, so that these mainstream discourses, or what we call the meta-narratives, right, they do not subsume the micro-narratives. In the micro-narratives, actually, the essence of, you know, diversity and democracy lies. So we have to make sure that this micro-narratives stay as they are not subsumed under the meta-narratives. And this also ensures that, you know, if we, as long as we assert autonomously, we make sure that the mainstream or these meta-narratives will always engage with the micro-narratives and their movements, right? So, and how do they engage? So here comes in the role of federalism. Okay? And then localized assertion has to be given attention by the national movements, and then within the framework of the federal state, we can work together, in fact, right? The national as well as the smaller autonomous movements within the federal structure can work together on attaining power, on attaining autonomy. And then this distinctions is also required, I feel, because, you know, we are, you know, as we are negotiating with other autonomous movements also, we are not just there are so many, like I said, you know, different autonomous movements. So they have to engage amongst themselves also, right? So that's why this independence, this autonomy has to be maintained. And the distinction has to be maintained, not just from the mainstream, but also within ourselves. And we keep negotiating, engaging with other, you know, autonomous movements, right? So that you see, like, you know, the Adivasi movement is engaging with the Dalit Bahujan movement. The Adivasi movement is engaging with the left movement. So in that sense, you know, we have to keep these distinctions so that we make sure that there is diversity, as well as, like, you know, we have negotiating powers, and that negotiation is important. Otherwise, any autonomous movement, what it becomes is what you call a class in itself, you know, which is only concerned with their own immediate realities, which is I think, it's hindering to the growth of the movement itself, right? Now, let me come to the principle of the sixth schedule. Okay. What does sixth schedule represent? Like I said, what it represents in the mainstream discourse, what it means, what does sixth schedule represent in the Constitution of India, and like I said, most importantly, what it means to us who are administered under its provisions, right? And people who live, in close proximity of the sixth schedule. People, many times what unfortunately has happened is many people who are living in close proximity of the sixth schedule, or people who are even administered under sixth schedule, do not understand what sixth schedule actually represents. That is the unfortunate thing. So I think that we have to look at, and that we have to talk about and discuss further. So as I see it, as I understand and see the sixth schedule, I think it represents four things. Okay. First is the tribal autonomy. It represents tribal autonomy. Second, it represents difference. Okay. The distinction from the mainstream or the meta narrative, like I said. Secondly, it represents difference. Third, it represents self-determination, self-government, right? And fourth, it represents a concept of rights, within the framework of the liberal democratic state. So four things. That is what I see, what exactly the sixth schedule represents. Now let me come to tribal autonomy. Now we might ask, who is a tribal? Right? And I think there is a long debate, who is a tribal, who's not a tribal. And this debate, I think, I don't exactly want to get into. But let me just tell you, let me just discuss what tribal means according to the sixth schedule, right? So in the document of the sixth schedule, as you see, if you go back to the earliest debates in the Constituent Assembly debates, if you just look it up, you see that the idea of tribal, there is definitely a racial content. It goes back to the British colonial rule, of course. There is definitely a racial content. Since originally the Schedule Areas Act 1874 had to do with administering of hill areas, of the present day Northeast region, where, lived different hill communities, and who were mostly of Mongoloid origin. Like, I think some friends a few days earlier had pointed out to me that, don't you think using this term would be offensive and all that? I thought about it, but yeah, there are all these debates, but then I don't exactly have such an issue. But then, as you see, if you look at the Constituent Assembly debates, documents of it, the leaders back then, they did assert this origin, this racial identity, this racial content of the peoples who call themselves tribal, at least within this region. So the leaders, when they speak, when they debated, they assert this Mongoloid origin, right? And then who speak Tibeto-Burman languages and Mon Khmer languages. That is what was asserted in the debates. And these people were, as the leaders debated, they asserted that these people were separate and independent from the caste Hindu society. So sixth schedule represents the autonomy of these peoples and their traditional institutions and cultures and food habits and language, so on and so forth. So all of these are placed within the framework of the liberal democratic Indian state, liberal democratic Indian constitution. And that is what firstly sixth schedule is supposed to represent, I feel, which is tribal autonomy, right? Second, like I said, it represents difference. So what difference? If one looks at the rationale and provisions of the sixth schedule, if you just read, like I said, again, the Constituent Assembly debates that happened at that point of time, and what the representatives of the hill tribes and others opposed to it said, it definitely represents an idea of difference from the Indian nation and the national. In fact, Shri Rohini Kumar Chaudhary, he begins the argument against the sixth schedule in Constituent Assembly debate saying, we want to assimilate the tribal people. That's what he says. He says, we want to assimilate the tribal people. So the idea of difference is inherent there, right? So that's why they are different, and hence he wants to assimilate this identity, this difference with the people who are different with the mainstream. So you see, there are these fears of, assimilation as well as segregation. Segregation, the fear of assimilation is there, no doubt, but at the same time, you have the fear of segregation also. And as I see it from the debates, that sixth schedule basically becomes a compromise, you see, a middle path to protect the differences that make these tribes unique and which is their identity. So another representative from the region in the Constituent Assembly debate was Reverend J.J.M. Nichols Roy, who specifically emphasized the different aspects of this, this difference, of religion. He says, except for some form of Hinduism practiced among few people in the North Kachar Hills, besides that, the rest of them are Christians, especially the Nagas or the Khasis or the Mizos. They are Christians, and the rest, and some of them are Burman Buddhism. They follow this Burmese Buddhism, and then most of them they have their own animist practices. So they are separate from the caste Hindu practices. So that way, like I said earlier, he also stressed the difference of language, Tibeto-Burman languages or the Mon Khmer languages, and then of course the culture and the values, right? And then food habits. He stressed on food habits also. And then of different economic practices within the communities, within all these hill communities, the difference of economic practices from the mainstream or from the plains, right? And then of better gender relations. He stressed on better gender relations and so on. So this difference also is enshrined in the sixth schedule. At least if you go back to the debates. I mean, now I think the schedule itself in the constitution, it's a very broad, I think, very few pages, but then it's very loosely articulated. But if you go back to the history of it, if you go back and study the context of the assembly debates that happened, then you will see all this. Then you will see all this, things, right? After that, the third thing that the sixth schedule represents is the self-government. So our leaders back then who gave their representations to the Bordoloi subcommittee, who in turn presented to the Constituent Assembly, and later leaders like Shri Gopinath Bordoloi himself, and then Reverend J.J.M. Nichols Roy, who debated for the sixth schedule, makes an argument for self-government. And there were a few, these were a small number of few educated individuals, who were products of Western pedagogy, who could now better articulate their difference, and they felt the need to assert this right to self-government. And in fact, Reverend J.J.M. Nichols Roy in the Constituent Assembly debate, he invokes even Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's Gram Swaraj, and says, if people want to debate and accept self-government at the village level, then why not the Indian Constitution grant self-government to the communities who are different from the national? And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution, in fact, he called these hill communities republics in themselves, and recalls that they were independent of the caste structures and that ought to be protected. So thirdly, like I said, it represents, in my opinion, self-government. Fourthly, what sixth schedule represents is rights. See, the document that came out of all these deliberations, the sixth schedule at the end of the day, being part of the Indian Constitution, it became a rights-based legal document with ideals which were drawn from this earlier debates, like I said, which I've pointed out, the self-government or the difference or tribal autonomy. So, so all of this put together, sixth schedule became a rights-based legal document enshrined in the Indian Constitution. And the document, it promised several legal safeguards for the hill tribes and different entitlements and preferential treatment in terms of polity and in terms of their economy and in terms of their culture. So this is what I think, four things I wanted to discuss about what the sixth schedule represents. Now I come to specifically the Dima Hasao or the erstwhile North Kachar Hills, right? And the council, and I don't want to just specifically look at the council, I want to look at the entire district also. So, how the council as well as the district and the populace of the district has engaged, with autonomy, how it has engaged with autonomy through the sixth schedule and the praxis of autonomy through the sixth schedule and the apex body there, that is the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council, and look at certain contradictions, the shortcomings, internal contradictions. So that I want to discuss a little bit. North Kachar Hills, actually, it came under British colonial rule in 1854. And at the time of independence, it became part of the then larger Assam, right, with six scheduled provisions. When Bordoloi subcommittee was taking representations from local leadership of hill tribes, right? So what happened in North Kachar Hills, a tribal council called the North Kachar Hills Tribal Council was formed by a few educated Dimasa youth and headed by H.M. Haflongbar and D. Hojai. And this tribal council was formed by convening a meeting of selected tribes, peoples from different tribes of the district, such as the Dimasas or the Jemes and the Thado Kukis, the Bietes, the Rangpols, the Mars and Karbis in a general meeting, which was held at the Haflong Town Club, which is now, I think, called the Heaven Blue Athletics Club. That is the thing. And the body, this council, they came up with a memorandum and they submitted it to the Bordoloi committee for inclusion, making claims for inclusion in the sixth schedule of the Indian Constitution. Now, they had about 10 to 11 demands. They had about 10 to 11 demands, such as local administration, which should be put in the hands of the local people, and protection of local customs, and a separate portfolio in the provincial cabinet for the administration of tribal affairs. And it should be in charge of, the district should be in charge of a tribal, this cabinet, the tribal affairs should be in charge of a tribal person. Separate secretariat for the management of tribal affairs. Representation in the legislative assembly, and they demanded 2 seats in view of the multiplicity of ethnic groups residing there, right, in the legislative assembly. So along with the Karbi Anglong, this district, there were several others, but right now in Assam, actually, the greater Assam that was there, right now if you see, along with Karbi Anglong, the North Kachar Hills or the Dima Hasao district is the only one that is yet to attain autonomy outside the political map of Assam, despite so many movements. The rest of the original frontier tracts of 1880 or the backward tracts of 1919, excluded and partially excluded areas of 1936 and tribal areas of 1950 have actually, even the North Kachar Hills, which was part of such movements in the past, such as the All Party Hills Leader Conference. So they have actually moved away from the political map of Assam. The APHLC, the ones who were all these hill districts, which are part of all these backward tracts or excluded areas and partially excluded areas, right? So all of them have actually, now they're working on paving their, like I say, they have formed their own states. Like of the APHLC movement, which actually the North Kachar Hills was also a part of, the Karbi Anglong was also a part of. Now they have formed the state of Meghalaya. But and there are other groups like other districts which are now Mizoram or Nagaland. But then the Karbi Anglong and the North Kachar Hills or the Dima Hasao district, despite several movements, yet despite several autonomy movements and others, they still remain within the political map of Assam. So having said this, let me just quickly come to the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council, which is the apex body within the district, right, run under the provisions of the 6th schedule. And I think like the organizer pointed out at the beginning, right? So it's called a constitution within a constitution, and hence the NCHAC is also called a mini parliament. Okay, it's called a mini parliament, and the just like the PM or the CM, we have a chief executive member running at the, who is the who leads the council and who is elected by and from among the members of the autonomous council who are elected by the people of Dima Hasao. Now I just made this analogy of the CEM with the CM, with the chief minister or the prime minister, just to make it's a simple analogy, just to make things clearer, because many times people don't know CEM, CM. There is a lot of confusion. People, especially who are away from 6th schedule, who don't understand it and all. So, but then that doesn't mean that CEM has even close to any powers as even a CM or the PM. Of course, forget it. Let's just we cannot even go there. So, just to make that analogy, I just try to simplify it. And then the chairperson of the autonomous council. So he or she is analogous to the speaker, who is also elected by and from among the members of the autonomous council. So the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council presently has 30 members, 28 who are elected and 2 who are nominated by the state government. 2 are nominated by the state government. And the political party, which has majority of the members of the autonomous councils, elected MACs, which I'll call, will be the ruling party, right? So now let me come to what are the powers of the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council. So the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council has legislative as well as executive powers over several subjects, right? And such as your land revenue, and I think the list of subjects that they are supposedly have control over, right? Legislative and executive powers over, it keeps expanding that list, such as the subjects, this list of subjects, such as land revenue, forest administration, or education and taxation, PWD, information and public relation, irrigation, social security, welfare, and so on and so forth, right? So, there are this list of subjects. So they have the NCHAC, the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council, is supposed to have legislative and executive powers over the subjects. And as for the judicial powers, which also actually, if you look at the document of the 6th schedule, so the councils are also supposed to have judicial powers. With respect to the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council, I mean, the 6th schedule does envisage village courts, and then we have subordinate autonomous council court, and then autonomous council court. But then what has happened is, in the council, none of this has seen the light of the day. None of this has been implemented. Now, there were sessions judges, I think, at some point of time under the office of the deputy commissioner. A deputy commissioner who is mainly always of the IAS or the ACS cadre, right? Now, since I think 2017, an office of the chief judicial magistrate has been created by the state government, and the personnel of which are completely from outside the district. You just go back to the website and just check it. The personnel of the office of the chief judicial magistrate is created by the state government since 2017, and the personnel of which are completely from outside the district. Okay, despite the fact that this is under the this body is of the district, which is under 6th schedule. So with regards to legislative and executive powers, like I said, the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council has all these different subjects and roles, but which are highly dominated by the state and the central government. You see, any bill that has been passed, so we have all our elected leaders, but then any bill which has been passed by the council has to be, assented by the governor of the state to be made into a law, without which none of the bills can even see the light of the day, right? And few substantial bills have been passed by, very few substantial bills have actually been passed by the council, and but certain important ones are still, awaiting assent, and they have been awaiting assent since decades now. Like for instance, very importantly, the 244A amendment of the Indian Constitution of 1979. Till date, nothing has happened with regards to that. 244A amendment of the Indian Constitution says that this district, right, the Dima Hasao district or the erstwhile North Kachar Hills district and the Karbi Anglong district will be made into an autonomous state. But then that has not been, although it's there, it's a constitutional amendment, but nothing has been done till date. And then there are several bills which I think, they have been passed in the council, but because they have not been assented by the governor, so they have not seen the light of the day, such as the salary enhancement bill, of the executive members and the chief executive member. So none of that has seen the light of the day. In fact, for that matter, the memorandum of understanding that was signed, right, in 2012. So what is the status of that, right? Which is supposed to give us an territorial autonomous council. So what is the status of that? There is no movement regarding that. And now, so that is the limit, the impediments to the political power of the autonomous council. Now let me come to the fiscal autonomy. Okay, let me come to the fiscal autonomy, and which is completely under the state government. The North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council, it prepares the budget, but only state assembly can pass it, after which an amount is allocated by the development commissioner of the Hills Areas Department here in the Secretariat, in Assam Secretariat in Janta Bhavan, which is again in 70-30 ratio. 70 for Karbi Anglong, 30 for the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council, right? Then after that, even the salary component, okay, itself of the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council employees, the salary component comes from the State Finance Commission. And now it has been made completely online, since now we are talking about digital India and everything. So now, everything has become completely online, which means that in practice, what happens is the complete control of the employees' salaries of the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council is under the state government and not the council, right? Even when it comes to personnel appointment, yes, you have certain, the council can appoint certain, employees of the council, but, when it comes to the upper level employees, the personnel who run the council, right, such as the principal secretaries or the now again look at and there is so much control of the deputy commissioner. So all of these are coming from outside the district, the personnels who mainly administer the district. And then when it comes to law and order, it is completely under the state government. There is nothing that has nothing to do with the district administration. Next comes so what has happened is, because of this, the state staff, right, is always, dominating the council staff in all their activities. You see, there is no free participation, freedom. There is no autonomy in the participation in the activities of running your or managing your own district. You see, and so work cannot be done autonomously if for everything you have to have a signature from someone sitting outside the district, right? So there is an alienation, like how Marx says, right? There is an alienation at the job level. So when now, okay, I spoke a little about this. Now let me speak about how much the resources, right? So we are supposed to have land, right, in the district, which we can, the resources of it, which is we are supposed to exploit, and which we are supposed to use for the development of our people back home, right? So what about the resources? So the reserve forests if there is, I mean, there is, right, in the district. So that is again under the state government. Now that the council is not in charge of the reserve forest, right? Now we have a lot of unreserved forests also, right? And all the produce and all the products. But then the extraction of the resources there in the council, that again is under the control of the state government. Okay. And also now look at so many resources have been, you know, I think of late we have been hearing about stone mining and sand mining and so many resources that are being taken away, like bamboo and so much. The Hill district actually produces and has actually a lot of resources now, and it has been being exploited and extracted by the state government as well as the central government for years now, right, for decades now. And then I think we have to look at the environment impact assessment. There is no doubt about that. But what about the royalty? Okay, what about the royalty on the natural resources that the governments are taking of the royalty that we get from the profit that the state government or the central government gets from selling these resources, right? They might be distributed to a minuscule few from the district, but it is not being used again into pushing the development of the masses of the districts, of the district. So that is another problem. I think there is a contradiction there, although there is autonomy, we say, but this, when it comes to resources and the exploitation of the resources, we are not getting the fruits of the resources and the profit from the resources. Then another thing, what I think is a problem in the district is, so given the size of the district, within the district, there are too many constituencies, right? There are too many constituencies which have been created over years now, and then which has led to too much of party politics, leading to too much of, you know, party politics. I think there is a famous song by a famous person from Haflong. He says, BJP se Congress, Congress se BJP. I think many youths know that song. So, you know, people have lost faith in the leaders due to this change of party. Today here, next day there. But why is it happening? I think, you know, the reason can be seen into all this constituencies, extra constituencies, I believe, you know, which has been created within the district. Okay, within the district. Representation is required. I'll come to that in the next point. But here within the district, I think too many constituencies, too many seats have been created. It's my opinion, which I feel has led to too much of party politics, leading to a loss of faith in the people, or in party, in ideology, right? And actually it has turned our people there into only patrons, into only clients, and the local members of autonomous councils, they are the patrons, or then we have higher patrons at the state and the central level, and then there are patrons, and the people are mere clients. It has been reduced to a patron-client relationship. I think that has to be addressed. And also, I want to bring to your attention the issue of nominated seats, right? Like I said, 28, you have the elected, and then 2 nominated seats. Now, okay, fine. And then, this nominated seats are there. But then the thing is, I think, the council is fine, but then if that is the case, that we have nominated seats from outside the district, I mean, from non-tribal communities, if that happens, in the past, actually, sometimes, it's not the case that always non-tribals have been nominated. But then now if you see, there is a certain arbitrariness, and then, there is a nomination of seats of non-tribals. Well, that is fine. Let's say, that is fine. But if that is the case, then why do we have only 1 MLA in the Legislative Assembly? And in terms of, the Member of Parliament, right? Karbi Anglong and Dima Hasao are a joint constituency. So we have only 1 MP. And till date, we have not had any MP from the Dima Hasao district. So I think all these contradictions have to be addressed, right? Within the functioning of the North Cachar Hills Autonomous Council. So due to all these gaps in the claims and praxis of the North Cachar Hills Autonomous Council, there have been continuous movements. I want to mention 3 trends in the autonomy movements within Dima Hasao because of these contradictions in the claim and praxis of autonomy, right? So first is like, tribal autonomy movements that we have had, which is rooted in the tribal identity, where, several tribes have participated together and they come together with ideas of shared experiences of history. There is this idea of racial unity and shared marginality by the other, right? Then, so shared marginality. So legitimacy claims is made on the basis of distinct cultural domains and within the contours of Indian nationalism. So we have had such movements like, where the North Kachar Hills of Dima Hasao has been part of. Like, we were part of the North Kachar Hills was part of the APHLC movement, or then which finally led to the APHLC stands for All Party Hills Leaders Conference, which finally led to the formation of the Meghalaya state. Then after that, we had the ASDC, right, which the organizer also pointed out at the very beginning, the Autonomous State Demand Committee. So, and even representation, several representations from autonomy from different leaders from political parties have made a case for autonomy due to what they feel and what is actually a differential treatment by the state government. Like, the imposition of Assamese that happened, or overbearing intervention in official matters and impediments. So all these things. So there has been like tribal autonomous movements, led by first, like I said, APHLC, and then later ASDC, which was centered in Karbi Anglong, and then later in North Kachar Hills or Dima Hasao. Then secondly, I see that because of all these contradictions, ethnic homeland movements have also come up in the district. Where the claim, the legitimacy, where the claim for autonomy or for independence, or the claims are made on particular ethnic groups, which could include other ethnicities, but in practice you see generally they resort to the history and cultural symbols of one particular ethnicity, and they feeling that others can be brought under that. So a certain narrative around past rulers and is emphasized, and then which is associated with the legitimacy and power creation, right? So, and it is rooted in cultural markers and a sense of belonging and indigeneity and participation in distinct cultural domains. So we have had such ethnic homeland movements in the district, such as the one led by the Dima Halam Dauka, DHD, for Dimaraji, right? And third trend, which I'm also seeing, is an articulation and a case for indigeneity, which is being heard now, right, by different tribes. And I think more, everybody has been, but as a movement, I think like, the one that was formed in 2012, the Indigenous Peoples Forum, which was formed in 2012 by several tribes, the non-Dimasa tribes of the district. So they have also been claiming for bifurcation of the district. So these are several, I think, three trends, mainly three trends, which encapsulate the urge for autonomy by different groups within the district, right? How much time do I have left?
You can go on for another 10 minutes.
Okay. So, so these are the contradictions and the problems and different trends that I try to focus on. Now, let me come to, like I said, I think while discussing the contradictions within the council itself, I think, since I spoke about the certain problems, I think we can look for solutions by once we recognize those problems. So I don't want to speak of like, such the solution bit again. But what I feel is like 2 points I want to mention when it comes to solutions, a way forward for the people of the district, and not just the district, larger. It shouldn't just remain within the domain of the district that few tribes peoples are demanding autonomy. It shouldn't remain at that, right? I think other people should also understand the need for the participation, the equal participation of everyone in a democratic setup. So like I said, okay, so first thing that I want to point out is all the concerns, right, of the lack of autonomy in political and financial and legislative matters, right? They have to be addressed by the state government and the center, first and foremost. That has to be done. I think, all of us have to chalk out these problems. We have to have a sitting and we have to chalk out these problems, and we have to ensure that, and even the state government and the center, I think they have to look into these problems. They have to address the concerns of when people say that they don't have autonomy in all this matters, right, in all the in financial or political, legislative. So when people say that they don't have autonomy, I think that should be addressed by the state government and the central government. It shouldn't be, okay, this is a small district somewhere lying in the periphery, in the margins. It doesn't really matter to the larger democratics, I mean the electoral politics. No, that shouldn't be the case, right? The state governments and the central government has to look into the concerns of the lack of the autonomy of this population here. Secondly, to make the state take action, what should be done? Like I have already pointed out certain trends of movements which have been there and which are there within the district. Now, all those movements have to be, social movements have to be strengthened. And these movements have to be strengthened, and this have to be turned into political demands. Social and political movements have to be made, right? And given the internal contradictions within the tribal communities, right? We are not a homogeneous group. We have to understand that. There are several and severe internal contradictions. So that has to be addressed. If we want to build a strong social movement in the district, which can make demands or political demands of the state and the center, I think everybody in the district has to make sure that, we have to understand and address and discuss the internal contradictions that we have. And more than at the level of the state, we have to do it at the level of this exchange, and this intercourse has to happen at the level of the civil society, between and among different tribes, not just tribes, even others, everyone, right? Because the problems of this kind of an exploitation and suppression from outside, right? It affects everyone in the district. It doesn't affect just a few groups or one group, it affects everyone equally. So I think, strong movements have to be built in the district. We have in the district, I think, we have everyday exchange between different communities, but there is no dialogue happening, right? For that, I think dialogue has to happen. Narratives have to be built around the case of, strong tribal autonomy. Okay, we have to build strong narratives around that within the district. For that, after that only, I think, in the name of public participation, in the name of, doing good for for public spirit, right? We have to have proper dialogue. We have to build social movements, which we have to make strong political demands of the state government and the central government. So I think, and what will happen if we are able to do that is this will lead to strengthening of institutions at all levels. See, having autonomy at the local, at the smallest level, at the most micro level, it actually, I think we should be, creating models which even others can follow, right? And then since we are, I think, quite small that way in comparison to other bigger structures, right? So I think it is an opportunity also, which we have to understand. It gives us an opportunity also where we build, strong models, right? Inspirational models where our institutions are strengthened, are strong at all levels, and where, engagement and then we also should be able to have engagement and negotiation with other autonomous movements, where, so that we can, like I said earlier, we are able to negotiate with the state and this other meta narratives and discourses. That is a must, right? So I think I'll stop here. In conclusion, I would like to say that autonomy is not just about wresting power, right? it is about making profound changes in social relations, which we have to understand before we start building, institutions, before we start talking about power and representation. We have to understand it is about making profound changes in social relations, right? I would like to end with a quote of one of my principal ideologues, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who we've all fondly called Baba Saheb. So he said, it might be asked why the principle of equal justice has failed to have its effect. The answer to this is simple. To enunciate the principle of justice is one thing, and to make it effective is another thing. And for that, we have to educate, agitate, and organize. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rakhi. It was a very, very invigorating session.
Yes.
Now, before we finally wind up, we would like to take some queries and questions, if at all there are. Please put in your queries and questions in the chat box. I can take them one by one, and kindly limit your questions to Dima Hasao. Because the case study made was on Dima Hasao, so it will be not, it will be a little difficult to take questions from other 6 schedule areas and all. You have a lot of compliments coming as to very nice presentation, ma'am. Or then somebody writes that. Somebody writes that, your presentation was very nice, very good. We are very glad to join this webinar. Then there are also somebody writing that it's a very interesting presentation, very eloquently argued, and overall a great presentation. Well addressed, all pertinent issues have been very outrightly put properly. Thank you so much. So many of them are writing that. Any queries? Till now, no query has come up.
Okay, then I will go. I have other webinars of my own teachers to attend.
Now, I believe everybody is highly convinced of whatever arguments were put forth by you.
Okay. Yes, I see a question from Dr. Diba Borua.
Yes.
Yes, madam. There is no mention of women representation and gender equality in the 6th schedule. Has the council taken steps to address this issue? Thank you so much, ma'am, for that question. Yes, it is a major concern. I agree, and I think I missed out on that. In my presentation, I thank you so much for bringing that up, right? So yes, I think, when it comes to gender representation, it is, when it comes to our council also, women's representation has been very less. I think right now the chairperson of the council presently is one of the first chairpersons, female chairpersons. And before that we have, I think, besides a few autonomous council members, just 1 or 2 here and there, we have not had any female member. I think it is a matter of grave concern. And like I said, all of us have to take that into consideration. And I personally feel that in that sense, we can take so many lessons from the traditional institutions of the tribes there. Because when it comes to traditional institutions of the tribes, not that the tribal institutions are not without their problems, but then there is actually, distribution of functions within the community, right? There is equal distribution of functions within traditional institutions of tribal communities, right? And there is, like, in decision making also, the work between women and men are distributed equally. In decision making also, women have women have role in certain decision making in certain areas. Men have decision making powers in certain areas. That is there within the tribal institutions. I think, the 6th schedule, when we're talking about, saving our culture and all that, I think that has to be taken into consideration. I think all of us have to work towards that. Thank you so much, ma'am, for that question. I think people who are here from the district, ma'am has very rightly pointed it out. I think all of us have to take into consideration. So yeah, thank you.
There is a question that has come to my private chat that is from Bharat. He writes, how do you see that the present government violates the 6th schedule administration?
Are you talking about present government only?
Yes, he writes present government here.
Okay, okay. No, it's not just about the present government. I like when I pointed out the contradictions that has been going on. So Bharat, thank you so much for that question. But it's not just about the present government, and it has been continuously the tribal autonomy that sixth schedule is supposed to represent. There are so many gaps, from the very beginning. So yeah, I think that question is also fine. Like present government, yes, I think there are issues. Maybe I'll have to think a little bit more about that, particularly in relation to the present government today. But I don't see that. Earlier also the situation was same. Now also it's not very different. I don't want to say that it's just like the problem is there from the very beginning. In the essence of it, we have to work on creating better models, actually more representative models. So those issues are there.
All right, this question is from Girija. She writes, you have mentioned of the 3 trends in the Dima Hasao movement. I think she wants you to elucidate.
Oh,
The 3 trends.
Yes. Like I said, first is the tribal autonomy, right? Second is, like I said, tribal autonomy, where like going back to movements of the, where NCH was, North Kachar Hills was part of, such as the APHLC movement, the All Party Hills Leaders Conference movement, right? Who were demanding tribal autonomy, right? And then later it went to the formation of the state of Meghalaya and all that. You can look that up. Second trend that I'm looking at is the ethnic homeland, right? Ethnic homeland, I think, is different from the tribal autonomy. Okay, so ethnic homeland has certain, they have a different articulation, okay, and different markers and all that. I think you're working on it, so we can always discuss this further. But I think there is a difference. Third is, I think right now that is happening, and which I feel will grow further, is the indigenous peoples movement, the articulation of indigenous, right? Hence, when you say indigenous, there is an essence. I mean, you also have to look at colonization, right? So the articulation that indigenous, so we came first. So the rest who came later are colonizers. So that kind of an articulation. So I think I'm trying to look at I'm still working on it, but I think these are 3 different trends, around different articulation, around 3 different, not that separate, but 3 different kind of narratives, right? So that is what I think. I think we can discuss that further.
This is a question from Zuli Khaubang, who it's not exactly a question, it's an observation. She writes, it's good you raised that so far we have never had an MP from the district. And I think the platform to address greater grievances are not possible.
Yes. Thank you so much, Julie. We have to do that, right? I mean, we haven't had. So what happens is, I myself have seen during elections, our people they are only busy with our council elections, right? Our people, there is a gradation when it comes to what kind of elections our people back home are interested in. First, they are completely involved in council elections, but then there is only a very patron-client kind of a relationship in there. Then after that comes MLA elections, where again, like there is a little bit interest because, we have one representative. But then when it comes to the MP elections, we have no interest, right? Because we always think that, that will be a person from some other district which has bigger numbers and all that. So that, there is no involvement. Since there is no involvement, we don't understand why we need this, what kind of power it is going to give us, what kind of, safeguards it is going to give us, that we can go and raise our issues and concerns at the parliamentary level. So we have to make that kind of a, demand. And I think we have to bring that issue up.
All right, Zareen Sultana asks a very pertinent question as to why is it not so developed after applying the 6th schedule benefit in these areas also? What do we have to do for it?
Yes, thank you so much, Sultana.
Zareen, yes.
Zareen, yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, that is, I think, what I was discussing, right? There are so many impediments at so many levels. So there is exploitation, there is extraction of resources from the district, the fruits of which we are not given at the mass level, right? Maybe a few get something, but then at the mass level, we are not given the fruits of the resources that our district has, right? Then, when it comes to making rules and regulations within the purview of the sixth schedule to govern ourselves. We do not have autonomy. We do not have autonomy, right? The rules and regulations are made from top, not from bottom up. We are just, it's a sort of, we are just like, we get certain orders, we have to follow them. And many times there is the alienation from the rules that are there and how we have to practice them. There is an alienation. We cannot work with our full minds and our full spirit, right, in developing our district, because we don't have the power to decide what is best for our district. So because of all these gaps, I think, real development has not happened in the district. Okay, so I think I presented that. We can always have a discussion later. You can write to me. We have to work together for that, right? Yeah.
Desmita Bodosa's question is that many funds are provided for the development of Dima Hasao, but in reality it is not happening. Why?
I'm sorry, can you...
Her question is that why, in spite of the funds provided for development of Dima Hasao, nothing is happening in reality in terms of development. Why?
Yeah, I think I just addressed that question in some sense, I suppose, right? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, so, okay.
All right, this is a question. This is, I think, an interesting question from Sunjit Bosumatari. He writes, do you see some difference of development between the autonomous councils and the non-autonomous council areas in Assam and others?
Yes, definitely there is. But then you have to tell me specifically, like, which non-autonomous areas. Now, if you have to compare Guwahati and the district, then obviously there are huge gaps. So you have to tell me specifically which non-autonomous areas, because there are huge gaps. But then again, like, I cannot try maybe comparing some interior district in Upper Assam, right? Like Dokwakhana or, I keep hearing. So I cannot compare that with, let's say, Dima Hasao, right? And then if I try to compare it with, let's say, Guwahati, then obviously you will see huge gaps. So you have to be specific about, which area exactly. Autonomous and non-autonomous, I think, many things can be brought in. So, yeah.
Okay, Girija has another question for you. How is the ethnic homeland movement different from the indigeneity movement? Since you have mentioned the 3 trends in Dima Hasao, and have also mentioned the ethnic homeland movement to be different from the indigeneity movement.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. Let me just. Yeah. So I am trying to see what this ethnic homelands and the indigeneity movements. I mean, I'm trying to study them from the language, from what they articulate, right? So in case of ethnic homeland movements, what I have seen is, what has happened is ethnic homeland movements have become relegated to particular ethnic groups, right? Which actually they say that yes, it could take other ethnicities. But then if you look at the symbols, cultural symbols that they represent, okay, or ethnic homeland movements again go back to a certain, in case of Dima Hasao, you'll see they have been invoking a certain past, right? So within that past, okay, I think, emphasis is given on particular ethnic groups. And because of that past, right, because of being, of certain disposition in the past, I think, so you are making that ethnic homeland claim. So I think maybe, I don't think they are that separate, but yeah, I am trying to make a certain distinction. Because when it comes to indigeneity, I'm talking only of, because most tribes will make that claim of indigeneity within the district, but I'm talking in reference to a particular movement here, which I think later will of course broaden. But then in that, I think in the case of indigeneity, in the case of the movement of the Indigenous Peoples Forum, let's say, right? So there again, they are not specifying they are not making the group, they are not making that assertion on the basis of one particular ethnicity, right? They are again going to a larger, and then making claims of indigeneity, right? So yeah, I think they are little related. I think it still has to be worked on. I have been working on it since the past few days only. I think we can always have a discussion on it, but I think that in my opinion, I do feel that a difference can be suggested.
Okay. There's another, I would say, a pertinent question again put forward by Chiranjeev Nonisa. He writes, how autonomous is the Autonomous Council? Since you point out about the impediments in making decisions or availing financial aids.
Yeah, it is not autonomous. Yeah, Chiranjeev, it is not autonomous. That is what I'm going to say. Autonomous, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Because if you are autonomous, right, when you're supposed to be autonomous, you are supposed to have a, so what autonomy is claiming? That you can make rules. You have the capacity to make rules for yourself, to govern yourself. And then you can use those rules to in your exchange with others around you also. In our case, I think that first condition itself is not fulfilled when it comes to the autonomy aspect of the Autonomous Council. So I would say yes, the name is there, and I think that's why there is a confusion, because you say yes, Autonomous Council, but where is the autonomy in practice? So yeah, I would say there is no autonomy.
This question is by L. Nampui, who writes, what is your take on the reservation of seats for women in the district? Do you think it will be good for better representation?
Of course. We can have, we have, but we have to make sure again, there should be representation of women. And I would suggest the women should come from the communities which are lesser represented. I think when it comes to autonomy, practice of autonomy, and the ideals of justice and equality, we have to start from the bottom. So when you're talking about women, we think the understanding is that they are vulnerable, more vulnerable than the men, right? But then there are again internal contradictions also. So let us have reservation for women, and let us have reservation for women in the council from communities which have, let's say, lesser representation, which have never been represented. Let us work on that. Why just stop at women, right? We should have women from communities which have never been represented in the council. Let us make this a model which even people at the national level and at the global level can look up to. Thank you so much for that question.
This is an interesting question by David Haflongbar. He writes, what are the advantages about sharing a parliamentarian member with the district of Karbi Anglong? Since both the districts have one MP.
So there is no, advantages, or are you asking me disadvantages? I think, see, autonomy, self-government, self-rule, it's all empty talk if we don't have representation, right? If we don't have representation and if we don't have equal participation. So I think that, given that we have so many different communities, there are several communities who are same in the district of Dima Hasao as well as Karbi Anglong, but there are several communities which are there who are not there in Dima Hasao, and there are several communities which are not there in Karbi Anglong. So in the spirit of participation of all communities, I feel that we have to have more members. Let us have more members let us demand more members in the parliament for Karbi Anglong also, as well as for Dima Hasao. What is the harm? If we can have 27, if we can have 30 autonomous council members, then why can't we have one MP? And why just one MP? Let us have more MPs.
Okay, this is another question from Diba Borwa. She writes, there are no visible landmarks of change or infrastructure development despite the considerable period of autonomy given to the council. Why? Dima Hasao is still one of the most backward districts.
Yes. Yes, madam. There are a lot of problems. There are a lot of problems in the praxis, as I pointed out. So that the contradictions, like I pointed out, that has led to, like I said, the resources that are extracted from the region. So, generally people say that, yeah, council employees, they don't pay taxes, But then, first of all, firstly, our people are not even getting their salaries on time. The salary component, like I said earlier, right? So that is elsewhere. The control of it is elsewhere. The resources that are extracted from our district, the royalties we don't get. Where are the royalties, right? So that we can put it into the development of the people again. So, and then like I said, the bills that are passed, because we will know best how to develop oneself, right? But then the bills that are passed by the district, the demands that have been made over years, none of that has been assented. We are still waiting for assent from the, the state, at the state government level, at the central government level. So we are not able to develop ourselves with, in our own ways, which is best suited to our people. So that is why, and because of that, there has been a lot of corrupt activities, right, within the district, centered outside the district also. So because of that, a lot of problems have come up in the implementation of all the schemes. And like I said, right, our employees back home, so there is an alienation, right? Because the control, there is so much control from outside. They cannot give their best. I mean, you work best on any institution when it is, you feel that it is yours, when you can give positively to that institution. When there is so much control from outside, it becomes very difficult for them to function independently, to think in, new ways, innovative ways for development. Even if you think in innovative ways, where are the funds? There are no funds. That has to come from outside. And the resources are extracted, the funds we don't get back. The salaries of the peoples are not coming on time. And then we don't get, so we don't, people might say that they don't pay the taxes, but then there is no pension for the people, for the employees. So there are all these impediments which has actually led to the problems with the developmental projects in the district.
I'll take one final question before we wind up. This question is from Kharikapsa Dibyajyoti. He writes, is there any point about language development, especially about the native languages of Dima Hasao?
You mean where? In the sixth schedule? Or you're asking me like in general?
I think it is in general about Dima Hasao.
Especially in sixth schedule. Hello?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Especially about in sixth schedule.
Yeah.
Especially in sixth schedule, anything mentioned about the language?
No, not particularly to language. No. So see, if you look at the document of the sixth schedule, right? So we have in the constitution, we have a certain document, and then every district, they prepare their own codes. Okay. So if you look at it, there is nothing as such. I mean, they say that, yeah, in the constitution, it will be given, protection of culture, safeguard of culture. And yes, language is, most important part of culture, right? But then when it comes to language protection, there is nothing specific as such. And so that's why you see in the 1960s, right? In the 1960s, when the language, some language, the rioting happened, and there was this imposition, attempts at imposition of Assamese language as the medium of instruction. Actually, if you look at the memorandum that was submitted by leaders of the Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council and the North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at that point of time, they did point out in the memorandum, right, that, there is this language imposition which will hurt the linguistic diversity. And then they chose and for the medium of instruction in the district, that's why the official language was chosen as first your English and then later Hindi. Because, we all know that Haflong Hindi there in the district, actually it's a lingua franca. People thought that maybe it would be more suitable than even Assamese, right? So that was there in the 1960s. And then and then when after NEHU was formed, right, after the Northeastern Hill University was formed, actually, because of the imposition of Assamese by the Guwahati University and Dibrugarh University, for the medium of instruction as SMEs, actually the leaders also gave a representation that the colleges should be under the NEHU, under Northeastern Hill University, so that they choose English as the medium of instruction. And the NEHU was supposed to be for the hill tribes of all the region. So they had given that memorandum, presented that memorandum to the Prime Minister Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. But then what happened was that was rejected by the state government. I mean that not the memorandum. I mean that the demand that was made by the leaders that they should be allowed to study under Northeastern Hill University, that was not accepted by the government of Assam. So, like, yeah, I mean, but then there is no, provision particularly pertaining to language as such. That is, I think, for the council also can develop. But then nothing as such, I think, has happened. But then in the document of the 6th schedule itself, you have broad markers where you mention culture and tradition and customary practices. But then it doesn't really specifically speak about language.
All right. I think we are done with the questions. Before we wind up.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we are done with the questions now. Before we wind up, it was a very, very invigorating session that we've had today. And I also believe that we need to have a little more, platforms where we can talk, discuss, and associate ourselves more with the issues of the peripheries or the tribal areas. So before we wind up, I would now like to request the HOD of Department of Political Science, Dibakar Das, to extend a vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kunjaba. A warm and graceful afternoon to everyone present here. Respected Principal Sir of LCB College, additionally, Sir, IQAC Coordinator, Dr. Diba Barua Ma'am, respected resource person of today's webinar, Ms. Rakhi Naiding, my dear colleagues, and the respected participants. We are at the end of the webinar, and on behalf of the organizing committee, it's a great honor and privilege for me to offer the vote of thanks. It gives immense pleasure and satisfaction to offer vote of thanks to our honorable principal, sir, Dr. Edition Ali, who provides us the opportunity to organize this webinar. Now I would like to express my sincere thanks to Dr. Diba Barua Ma'am, Coordinator IQAC LCB College, for inaugurating this webinar and her thought-provoking inaugural speech. Next, I would like to offer my vote of thanks to the honorable resource person, Ms. Rakhi Naiding, who has enlightened us through her resourceful academic speech. I am sure that all of the participants benefited a lot from her speech. Thank you. I am also
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I am also grateful to Bikram Sharma of TSS Technology for his technical support in the Zoom application. Last but not least, I would like to offer my vote of thanks to all the participants for your cooperation and support in the entire program. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I forgot to thank you, sir, at the beginning. Thank you so much to the HOD, Head of the Department of Political Science, LCB College, Dr. Dibakar. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you to all the organizers and participants once more. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The participants are requested to please fill up the feedback form, and then the program has come to an end. Thank you so much.